What's up, traders? Eric here from MajorLeagueTrading.com, and let's review a trade here from today in the Russell. So the name of the game with this one, which a lot of you guys looking at the charts right now can probably assume where this trade ultimately happened at, and then kind of all the things, from there. But the key thing I want to hit on with this video, even though it is just a free nightly video, is just talking about risk. So for me on this trade, my game plan here coming into today, and there's a level up here at 2019.4 for the Russell. My game plan coming into the day was ultimately to look to buy a pullback in the Russell to 2004.50s. Now, the main reason behind this is if we take a look at, the Russell here and the gap it was having today, we look at something like the S&Ps, and the gap in which it was having, the level that the S&Ps needed to get above was 48.90, right? The level in which, NASDAQ needed to get above was 494s, which, ultimately you can see is like right up in through here, right? So the Russell was the only market able to actually get through those levels. And futures just reopened here, so you can see we're getting a little bit of a pop. It's just after 6 o'clock now. So we're getting a little bit more movement here out of these names. But that was my main thinking behind coming into the day is, hey, the Russell's been the strongest. It was the strongest yesterday. And if it can pull out a 2-day strong streak, which as we can see now ultimately is not the case, it was unable to do so. And I actually talked about that. If you're in the Discord, just go back and look for the term flip-flop. So I talked about it yesterday and today, and how I noticed early on today that NASDAQ was probably going to end up flip-flop to become that leader, which it ultimately ends up doing on the day, right? Here's the Russell chart that, makes the push to the downside. And then if we look at the NASDAQ, it manages to end up, get a nice little rally there on the day. So with that being said, though, this 2004.50 level, I was able to take an entry right off of the level. And the reason in which I was able to do that allowed me to do so, was because not only did we have the level, which is important, but we also had a signal down here. We had this divergence, i.e. the arrows firing off at the level. If you notice, we do get more signals on the day, right? But at that point, once we had broken under 2004.50s, we're not necessarily as interested in these, right? Because we're not anymore. We're not above this level. We're not potentially holding it, and we're not trying to trend to the upside. Which is a very key, important part, right? The trend is your friend until it ends. And that trend, from a small time frame perspective, ended under 2004.50s, right? So, but with this, the key piece, like I mentioned, that I want to talk about is risk. So for me, I was able to pick this entry up here off 2004.50s, and I gave myself a 2-point stop on this trade. So right down in here at 2002.40s. My entry was 2004.4. So just one tick under the level here on the day. Now, what that allowed me to do, and we'll talk in just terms of one contract per, just one contract per trade type thing, right? That allowed me a $100 risk in this trade. Now, again, I had more than one contract on this trade. But again, for the sake of, talking about risk metrics, one contract is sufficient, right? We're talking about $100 worth of risk on this trade. And my target, had we been able to rally and hit it, was i.e. opening print and then 2019.4s. So if we look at that, that's a 15-point move from 2004.50s to 2019.40s, right? That allows me a 7.5 R risk, right? If I'm risking 2 points on this trade, risking $100 to potentially make 15 points, right? That's a $750 gain on a one contract trade. That's beautiful. Like, that is, if you can get a 7R potential trade, like that's a pretty nice trade, right? So for me, ultimately on this one, we sat through a lot of chop on this, right? It ended up taking, a bounce, pullback, bounce, pullback, bounce, pullback. And it was just getting really, really annoying, right? And then ultimately we finally get this break up right here. And then once we pull back, and on this very bar, once we pulled back and we set this low in here at 2007.4s, right? I ultimately had at the low of that bar, once we got this rally back, right? I had a place that I could go ahead and put my stop loss in here and lock in 1.5 Rs, right? From 2004.40s to 2007.40s is a 3-point profit when I only had an initial 2-point stop in this trade. So I was able to lock in 1.5 Rs on this trade, which was perfect for me, right? I can't allow this thing to come all the way back to zero, considering at one point, you know, we had almost 7 points in this. I think the high 20011.8s, call it 20012s. So we had about 7 points worth of profit in this. So we had almost 3.5 Rs at one point, and then it slowly started to fade back, right? We wanted to try and get that 7.5 R push up to those highs, and just wasn't able to obviously make the move happen. So I'm giving a lot of little details and information into this video, but on this bar right here, as we broke under this prior bar on this 2-minute chart right here, is where I ultimately ended up trailing out of this position and locked in that R.5 for this trade. Now again, once we broke under 2004.50s, you can see we made a nice move to the downside, and we left 1978.40s down here untested, which we probably should have tested this on the day. And that brings me to the next point of, if we can test 1978.40s tomorrow from the open, trade lower, right? As long as we don't open beneath the level, as long as we can open above it, test it, and then start to get a bounce from there, then I like longs off of that level here for the Russell. If we fail under that level, then longs are off the table in the Russell specifically. Now, moving on from this one, I want to talk about snow, because snow is my absolute favorite chart on the board right now. And as you can see here, we're getting up through this 201.42 level. And I talked about this yesterday here, and then I talked about it again today in my Instagram chat. If you guys are the channel inside of my Instagram, so if you guys are not subscribed to that, then go do so, because we talked about this, and I also mentioned right here on this pullback when we were trading about 201.70s, I said, hey, here's your pullback opportunity from the 201.42 level, and I'm looking for this thing to make a move all the way up in towards 215s here. And as you can see, we closed at 205.58, and we're up about $1.20, $1.30 here in after hours already. And this is most likely on the back of Netflix, which reported earnings after the bell here today. And you can see it's getting a nice move in there, which this video is already getting a little bit long. So I'm going to wrap it up here, but I will post a plan, my thoughts, and some things on both Netflix and snow, and some updated SPY levels on my Instagram. So go check that out if you guys have not already. So thank you guys so much. I will see you on the next video. Peace.